Coming up today, 7 sizzling over-under projections. Who owns the most interesting spring storyline, and that one time that AI wrote about the Godcast?
You're listening to the Selfie is Godcast with Zack Meisel and T.J. Zuppe.
Fly ball, deep right field. Back is Spencer at the one and couldn't get the wall.
Subscribe to Selby is Godcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Unbelievable.
I've been told that people enjoy the awkwardness of you and I just staring at a computer screen while the intro music plays while this is on YouTube. So I've struggled with whether or not to edit it in a way where we don't begin the YouTube video until we're actually into the meat of the segment, or if we should leave it in because apparently, Zach, it's something that people like. What do you think?
We need an intro video. I think you need like a little display thing that plays while John Sanders is narrating the greatest moment in sports history.
Oh, okay. So you just now need me to create a video intro to go along with the audio intro. Just keep going, right? That's what you're demanding.
No. We have thousands of people listening right now, and I'm sure one of them has fancy background in this sort of thing, so we can commission them.
Then you could give them one of the 700 books in the background as thanks.
My home office is undergoing renovations right now, and all caused by an 8-month-old. So yeah, there's stacks of books. The background is not where I want it to be. This bookcase is new. It was in my basement full of bobbleheads and memorabilia, but now it's up in the office, so I can even rotate. Look at all those. There's Whammer.
Whoa. How about
Brutus,
that?
Jose, Tito. Yeah.
I think we should play like a game of hide and seek in the background of your videos. Every episode will hide something, just really random, see if people can find it. It's like a Where's Waldo sort of a game that would draw people over to YouTube. Those that are listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, Podbean, iHeartRadio, wherever you happen to listen to this show, no idea what we're talking about right now. That's fine. But over at YouTube, if you happen to subscribe over there and leave us likes and all sorts of love, so we hopefully grow and expand the show into multiple different platforms, you will see what we're talking about. So this was all strategic on my part. Good job by me.
Well, I'd like to form, random jerseys are cool, but imagine a top 25 just random or bizarre Cleveland bobblehead ranking.
Oh, yeah.
There are some great ones.
Now, are you talking about ones that they actually have given away or just ones that exist?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've got like the disco CC Sabathia one. That's a solid one.
Yeah, that is pretty random and obscure. And then you can find the Surfing Sizemore bobblehead that everyone has. So we can rank them from things that everybody has collecting dust to something that is actually a coveted commodity. Like the Albert Bell flexing bobblehead, that's one that everybody wants. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, what's another really common one that I feel like I have 700 of?
I have 1 million of those. The Michael Bourne laying out to make a catch.
Yeah, he was as coveted now, that bobblehead is apparently he was in the 2013 offseason, and that led him to sign with Cleveland. This offseason, though, has not, what I don't think is setting up to be a disaster. It's been pretty fun one. I am happy that we are now approaching spring training. We can now really start to think about spring training storylines. And you had even floated it to me, I think a couple of days ago via text, that there are many spring storylines, but somebody is, if you had to rank them, one of the storylines has to be the heaviest. It has to weigh the most in your head, at least is the most interesting as we begin things. And I'm curious, as you were crafting that question, who did you have in mind, or what did you have in mind as far as the most compelling spring storyline that you can't wait to start to sink your teeth into when you get out there next week?
So two directions that I would go with this. One, the catching spot. Is there anything Bo Naylor can do to land an opening day roster spot, assuming Mike Zunino's healthy and ready to go? Or is he ticketed to Columbus because they want him playing every day for a little while? And if the second part is the answer, if he's going to Columbus, who lands the backup catcher job? And not, if you're going into spring training saying, hey, the most interesting thing about this team is who might win the backup catcher spot, this is not a very interesting conversation. But there are some factors here. I mean, like Brian Lavastidis on the 40-man. Does that give him an advantage? Would you rather see a young kid like him or one of the veteran non-roster guys they signed? I think the catching spot in general is just sort of interesting and is going to be fluid probably most of the year. But the one I've mentioned it on the podcast, it's sort of, there's several tentacles here. I think I'll say it. I'll go with Plesac and Savali, but it's deeper than that. I mean, can those guys be the best versions of themselves? Because then if not, what's beneath the surface? And that's where my attention will be this spring is I want to know the pecking order. I want to know I assume you're going to go with a 5-man rotation in Columbus. Who are the 5? And what are you doing with the people who are ready to be in Columbus but aren't in that 5? And how close, where do Espino and Williams and Bybee start? How close are they to AAA? How close are they to the majors? And who's next? There's so much there that to me is attracting my interest and my intrigue more than anything else. And it's just interesting because I think we know the 5 starters in the opening day rotation, provided there aren't injuries. But I don't know if Savali stinks for a month, if Plesac gets hurt, if someone else gets hurt, the question of then what could have 50 different answers, and we should get a little bit more clarity as to what those answers are over the next 6 weeks in Arizona.
I agree that you'll begin to get some clarity, but you're not going to answer any of those questions in spring training. I don't think Savali or Plesac, barring an injury, are going to get kicked out of the rotation based on what happens in spring training, unless it's just not only is the car on fire, the wheels are on fire, you're also heading for a brick wall. Like, I can't imagine the scenario where one of those guys doesn't emerge with a starting spot in the rotation. That said, I think the pitching staff, there are certain things that will be intriguing, and I think possibly the most intriguing thing is that there is always somebody that comes to spring training having completely shifted something, whether it is adding velocity. That might be the most intriguing thing. What prospect now comes to camp having added 4 or 5 miles per hour to their fastball that they didn't have at this time last year, was more of a control guy. Now he's going to be on a top 100 list next year. This happens every year. This past year it was Tanner Bybee. Could be anybody, really. That's the fun of this organization and how they develop pitching. But it's also Arsenals, who has made some changes to the shapes of their pitches, shapes to breaking balls to maybe match a fastball or just the other stuff that's within their arsenals of pitches. All of that's intriguing, and you start to see those sorts of things emerge in spring training. But I think where you started this conversation is where I will finish it. As far as the catchers go, I really don't believe Bo Naylor can win a starting spot or a backup spot on this team unless there's something truly wrong or Zunino is just somehow way far behind than where they thought he would be. I can't imagine that's the case. But you can learn certain things about the way that they value Bo Naylor and maybe how quickly he gets that call based on how this goes. Are we going to see him behind the plate a ton? I think I would want that. If I was the organization, I'd be playing the hell out of that kid. With every pitcher I could find, I want him working with that guy. The next day, I want him working with that guy. I don't want to overload him, and I want to make sure he's set up to handle the season workload-wise. But the more work he puts in with the pitchers that are going to be on this staff, is better for when he does arrive, and he does have the relationships to now draw upon. But that also tells me if they're doing that a lot with him, if he's playing a ton, they're trying to get him that exposure because they think he's really close to helping this team. And as we've talked about before, just because you think Zunino is the one, there is plenty of space, especially coming off of an injury for Zunino, for two of those guys to share the workload, even if it's a 60-40 split.
He's a really bright kid, and you could tell he was only up for a few minutes at the end of last season, but he wanted to make sure he got the most out of it, even if it didn't result in any playoff at-bats or much experience in those, 5 regular season games he was up for. So I think they're just approaching it in terms of how do we have Bo Naylor have the most successful season? And I think in their minds, it's have him, like you said, just be the guy in spring and learn everybody, be around Zunino, spend more time with Sandy Alomar and Luke Carlin and just the major league coaches in general too. And there's 2 ways to look at it. You could be the backup catcher and play twice a week. And at some point, maybe he just proves to be the better catcher and he takes over. Or you could have him go to AAA, where he spent part of last season, catch every day. And he would also be catching pitchers that he'll probably catch in the majors too at some point. And then get the call at some point. But I guess my question is, and look, you always need more than 2 catchers. And we've been over the names of, Wilson Ramos. He caught a few games. And, Rene Rivera was there for a while in 2021. But I guess I'm just curious, what has to transpire for him? Does Zunino have to get hurt for Naylor to be the number 1 catcher at some point this season? Or can he just naturally take over because he's playing so well? And if that's the case, what's the path that leads to that? How does he get from Columbus Clippers opening day catcher to Cleveland Guardians number 1 catcher?
I think it's going to take them needing a bat on multiple levels. The beauty, if he is proving to be an offensive player as well as being able to handle the catching duties, is that you can now utilize him as a DH if you want to, as a pinch hitter if you want to. If there's a clear need for another left-handed stick on this team, nobody is playing well as the backup catcher, and maybe Zunino, you still are being mindful of how much you put on his plate as far as workload goes, there is absolutely room, even if it's not in we want this kid to catch 60, 70% of the games at the major league level. Don't you think? Don't you think there's a way for him to, especially at this position, slowly get his feet wet and get the benefits of having another offensive player perhaps on the bench that you could rotate in and get him acclimated to eventually become your number 1 catcher even as soon as maybe later this year? Do you think there needs to be an injury, or is that path there?
No, I predicted in my quote-unquote bold predictions that Naylor would lead the catchers in plate appearances. But
was that Goldfinger? What was that?
I'm not exactly sure how he
What was the
gets
spice level on that? I forget.
I don't know. Garlic Parmesan, maybe. But I don't know. it's a weird scenario just because, and I think part of what makes it weird is that Naylor came up last season. So if he didn't, I think everyone would just be like, okay, yeah, he'll probably start the year at AAA and hopefully he'll be up at some point and he takes the reins in 2024. But because we saw him, and because he had such an impressive season last year, it's like, well, he kind of got his feet wet. He kind of got some of those firsts out of the way already. So you could make a case for him being on the Major League roster. People were making a case for not trading for Sean Murphy and just letting Naylor be the guy right now. So it's sort of a weird spot. And I'm not sure what's going to happen. I think their position is they've loaded up on some of the non-roster guys. You know, if you need Cam Gallagher to be the backup for a little while, it's not the end of the world. David Fry is an interesting candidate in this mix as well, but I'm not sure how it plays out, because it's also like, you can only, like, let's say Cam Gallagher wins the backup catcher job. You have Zunino and Gallagher going into the season. Naylor's at AAA.
Wins. Like, what is wins?
Wins. Like, what has to happen? Like, Cam Gallagher, if he's your backup, like, I don't think you're expecting a lot out of him. So you're just going to wake up one day in late May and be like, all right, today's the day we're DFAing Cam Gallagher and calling up Bo Naylor to take that spot. Like, what triggers that?
Service time. Just service time. That seems like the easy one. You factor how many days was he up last year, subtract that off of how many days he would need to be up this year. Well, let's see here. Then you could just circle it on your calendar. When it no longer would equal a full year of service time is when you might see that kid come up. As sad as that is, but that's the way this team has to operate. Whatever.
This stuff usually takes care of itself, and it ends up not being a big deal. It's interesting to me because they haven't had... When was the last time they had like a really well-regarded catching prospect? Carlos Santana?
Carlos Santana.
Yeah, so... And because of the state that the team is in. Carlos Santana, I mean, I remember wanting him called up badly because the team stunk. And it was like, I want someone who I want to watch be on the field. This is just interesting because it's a good team. And you have the veteran stopgap. So you have to figure out what is the best route forward that's going to help Naylor's development and not hamstring the team.
Well, that's the other thing. I want this young man to be ready to take over as soon as 2024. And if this team is good, it's going to be real difficult to hand the reins over to a young catcher that's never had a real long, legitimate look in the major league level to then position where this team will be in 2024. We'll absolutely have World Series aspirations. Now you're just going to hand it over to him? Or do you want to do it in the middle of this year when you have the veteran here, when it's an easier, more smooth runway to that actually taking place? That's why it makes a ton of sense why it's going to happen at some point. The only question is, at what point does it happen? And as much as I don't believe he's going to win a starting spot or even a backup spot in spring training, if he demonstrates that he can be trusted with the pitching staff, that he can handle the sort of stuff that major league pitchers have, that he can handle the running game in the way that the bigger bases, and we don't know how this is going to be applied to base running and base stealing, but if he can handle that, you're not going to learn all of these things in spring training. But I'll tell you what, if he comes out and swings the bat well, is hitting like 400 and is handling the pitching staff okay, I don't think the team's going to hesitate when they feel like whatever that date is, that's the dude. That's the guy we're calling it up. We need this to progress.
I said at the beginning of this, catcher was the very secondary storyline. How do we end up spending 15 minutes on it?
Because that was my first. I run the show.
Fair enough.
That's how this works. Okay, explain to me why you think the pitchers are more in spring training. We're not talking about in the season. But we're talking about just spring training storylines. You still feel like the pitchers are the most key thing to watch. I mean, we're watching everything, but you're more focused on that.
You gonna make me list all the names again?
Yeah. Yes.
Because the 5 is set, right? So I just don't know. You beyond the 5, you have Battenfield, Pilkington, Gaddis, Curry, Cantillo. Who am I forgetting? There's somebody. Logan Allen. That's 6 right there. There's still more. And that doesn't include Espino, Bybee, and Williams, who shouldn't all be going to Double-A. At least one of them should be starting in Triple-A. Probably Bybee. But Williams made it up there for a minute, I think, too. So,
All right, let me give you the roster resource tool over at Fangraphs has listed at AAA for the Guardians right now. Xavier Curry, Joey Cantillo, Hunter Gaddis, Connor Pilkington, Touki Toussaint, Logan Allen, Peyton Battenfield, Tanner Bybee, Gavin Williams, Tanner Burns, Adam Scott. Oh my God, would that be a good major league pitching staff?
so Touki Toussaint, I was told, they're gonna put him in like a multi-inning relief role.
Makes sense.
Build him up to be that. So you don't have to worry about him. But my question is, will other people follow the same path? Does Hunter Gaddis end up doing that? Does Cantillo end up doing that because he's had injury issues? I just think the thing that I'm fascinated with is, like, do they take one of these guys and put him in the bullpen? Because if you're going to do that, you might want to do that in spring training so they can get used to it. And what's the pecking order? Like, where you're not going to get a sense of like who the first call up will be, because that's predicated on who performs once the season starts. But you can get an idea sometimes of certain guys who stand out, who they're really taking a liking to. You know, whether that's just there's more talk about them unprompted from certain coaches or front office people, or they're getting opportunities to pitch in games where maybe that wasn't necessarily the plan at the start of spring training. We've seen it. I mean, or you've seen, especially on the position player side, like that hitter who just sticks around as cuts are happening and it's like March 26th, then you're like, oh, wow, like this guy's still here. Wouldn't have expected that. And they don't make the team, but it says something, and they want to reward the player for their performance in the spring. And so they do that by making them the last cut, maybe. So I'm curious to see how this plays out, because you can't have a 10-man rotation at AAA. So do a couple of those guys go to AA? Does Espino, I know he only made 4 starts at AA last year. Does he really need to go back to Akron and strike out 52% of hitters? I don't know. Do Williams and Bybee have anything left to accomplish at AA? But are you just going to send them to AA because you have so many starting pitchers at AAA?
Right.
I just want to see how this is all sorted out. And if any of these guys are moved to the bullpen, if any of them are traded. And no, you're not going to get answers on everything in spring training, but you can start to see the pieces fall into place. There are decisions they have to make. There are deadlines with all of this just for planning purposes. So it's all interconnected, because you need more than 5 starters during a season. So on one hand, I'm interested to see just Plesac and Savali. Can they be the best Plesac and Savali we've seen yet? Because that would elevate this rotation to honestly where it needs to be for them to win a World Series. And then 2, if that doesn't happen, what comes next? And there's not a ton of bullpen competition this spring. I think there's like 1 spot available. Cody Morris, also another name who factors into this in several ways. But do you toss Morris and do you stretch him out Do you throw him into the bullpen mix? Do you throw another one of those starters into the bullpen mix? There's just... I think there's a lot there. You might not find it interesting, but I just talked about it for 5 minutes.
It's not that I don't find it interesting. I think it is interesting. It's just, I wonder how much can be solved in spring training and how much has already been solved to some degree in their heads now. I mean, don't you have to come to spring training? You can't say, we've never thought about this once. Now we're just going to let this all play out. No, there's already a plan in place, and I think you would just adjust off of that now.
But here's the thing. You know this. Their default setting is stretch out a pitcher as if he's going to be a starter.
Yeah.
And then you can always shift them to the bullpen.
Yes.
But if you know going into this that you have way too many cooks in the kitchen, can you do that with everybody?
Depends on if you have enough food to make.
What are you serving?
It didn't make any sense. It just in my head. I was thinking, if you have that many cooks, you better have a lot of food to make. In this case, there's only so many innings in a season. It's finite to a degree. I guess it's the answer could be infinite. You could play infinite innings. It just never ends. But most of the time, it's pretty finite on the number of innings you'll need. So yeah, and at every level, of course, they want the depth, but it's also a matter of not only filling the innings, but making sure you're protected in case you need a starter a couple of months into the season, and maybe you've already gone through a couple. Just because you think in your head, well, you're going to map like 7, 8, maybe 9 starters. I mean, we're not too far removed from the season where they needed a ton of starters, and the replacements were getting hurt, and the replacements stunk. So you just never know. You could just say, yeah, throw Cody Morris in the bullpen because that's where he helps the most. Yes, if everything's drawn up blueprint-wise and you have no hiccups along the way, Cody Morris could be a hell of a weapon out of the bullpen. Man, you imagine that guy coming in for 2 innings, cleaning up after a starter just went 5? That's amazing. Bridging the gap to where you want to be in the 7th, 8th, and 9th, that's fantastic. What team has that sort of weapon? But I might need Cody Morris to start a game in June. And if he's only been pitching 2 innings, it's going to be tough to do that.
We're going to look back one day in the future and we're going to say, hey, remember Cleveland had that pitching factory, and year after year they had a stout rotation. And then in 2021, they had Cal Quantrill, Sam Hentges, and J.C. Mejia pitching on short rest. What the hell happened?
Just couldn't bridge that gap. So Tito always talks about trying to think about how you stretch to the end of the game when your starter exits early, right? Well, for the Guardians, if you want to talk about the length of a franchise and the years that go into it, they were trying to stretch to when the younger pitchers were ready to go, and they were a year too soon. But you might have found something, Sam Hentges getting all that run and then enabled him to get thrown into the bullpen, and who knows? Who knows? Maybe you're better off for it somehow in some fantastical way. But there are certain things you just can't project in the season no matter how much you try to plan for it. What's the saying? Something about God laughing at your plans? Or I don't know what the saying is, but there's something to that degree. But as much as you can't project it, we spend this time in spring trying to project these things, just like every other computer model has a projection system, and I've picked up another one in which I want to ask you some over-unders based on the BAT projection system. As we've used Steamer, we've used Zips. I like the BAT. The BAT and the BAT X are kind of cool. And so I've pulled 7 of them, and I want you to give me some over-unders whether or not you think the computers are wrong. Are you prepared to do this?
No, because let the record show you did not run these by me beforehand.
Exactly.
So I have no idea what's coming my way. These will be off-the-cuff opinions, and they will be correct.
That's why we like them. And I didn't run them by you because I just finished it 5 minutes before we hit record.
Don't tell them our secrets.
In radio, the best shows I ever did were the ones where I got out of the car, walked in, and the music was basically playing. The intro music. The worst shows are the ones that I sat there and planned for 3 hours. Awful, awful stuff. But if you listen to it, you realize they're all pretty bad. That's why I sit here and do this with you. First one. Jose Ramirez. 5.9 wins above replacement.
I'm so glad you asked. Because I just got done writing a story about Jose Ramirez's Hall of Fame chances. I know we talked about that on the show a couple weeks ago. And I believe Zips had it at 6.1 for this coming season. You know, he's averaged 6.4 over the last 6 seasons. So, or I think seven seasons. So you would think the over, and you would think he's healthy. And what did he have last year? 6.8? And he did it with a torn ligament in his hand. So I would take the over. The interesting thing for him is in my calculations, okay, 6.2 last season. My calculations, he needs like 26 and a half more WAR to catch up to Paul Molitor. There have been 9 third basemen selected to the Hall of Fame in the last 60 years. Paul Molitor is 9th on the list in WAR, 67.6, I think. And Ramirez is at 41.2. So if he has like 4 more seasons of even like 5 WAR or higher, he can catch Molitor like pretty certainly. Which, you know, you look at some of the counting stats and it's like, all right, he's going to have to hit 30 homers a year for the next 5 years to have any shot of getting to like 400. He's going to need to hit a ton for like 6 or 7 years to get up to like 22 to 2,500 hits. Like some of those counting stats are going to be really tough because 2020 season, he lost 100 games. 2014 and 2015, he was really struggling upon his introduction to the majors. But like the rate stats are all there. And the one that stood out was WAR. You know, Adrian Beltre had 44.6 WAR starting with his age 30 season. If Jose matches that, he'd be right up there with Chipper Jones, George Brett, Wade Boggs. No doubt Hall of Famer. You can't predict anyone to match that. Beltre just became like a force of nature in his very late years. But like if he can get 30, then he'll surpass Molitor. He'll surpass Roland. Like it's pretty impressive. I know you didn't ask me for any of this. You just wanted an over and under. So my answer is over. Because I still think like he's in his peak. He's in his prime, and I feel like I'm still waiting for that one season where he just goes nuclear. So I'll keep predicting it as long as he's not showing any signs of decline.
The thing that's difficult is we always think about accumulating WAR. What we rarely factor in is those last few years where, he starts going the other way. It's like the unfortunate Albert Pujols syndrome where you're like, oh, well, he had just crossed, 100 WAR? And then all of a sudden he went underneath and you're like, no, you should have stopped playing. And then maybe his last year took him back over it. It's like part of the cool story. I'm going to have to look at that exactly. But I think that in my head, that was the way that played out. You know, how does the last few years of Jose, does that, like, he has like a negative 1.5 or something?
Don't you think he'll be helped, though, by like his base running? I know he won't, his speed will decline over time, but he's such a smart base runner.
Yeah. I mean,
and even
yes,
with his,
I also
like he'll lose some bat speed over time, but he's never been a guy who you're not concerned with what his exit velocity is or anything like that. And I feel like he's a smart enough hitter he'll still find ways to be valuable, I think, into his 30s, even if it's not posting 6-win seasons.
Baseball Reference, Pujols finished with 101.7 career WAR, and yes, like that 2021 season had a negative 0.7, and that was getting him close to under 100. But then he finished this past year with 2.2 wins above replacement. Good for Albert Pujols this past year. And for Jose, as much as we know he loves the game of baseball, can't you see this dude trying to play until he's like 42?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he's got 6 more years in Cleveland, so that'll take him to his 36th birthday.
Yeah, just about.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens after that.
This had nothing to do with my over-under, by the way. We're only talking about 2023, and none of this had anything to do with that.
I say over.
I'm going to take the over, too. Because you know how much I've been talking up the shift and how much that's going to make a difference to every hitter. Like, add 40 points to everybody's batting average. That's what I've always said.
But here's the thing. 5.9. So here's his WAR total each of the last 7 seasons. And for 2020, I'll do what the projected would have been since he only had 58 games. 5.3, 6.7, 8.1, 3.5, 8.6, 6.5, 6.2. So he's gone over 5 of the 7 years. And like most of those are pretty safely over too.
Yeah, I think it's still a safe bet for over there. All right, number 2. I thought this was a really good number. Josh Bell, 122 WRC plus. Man, I feel like that's a great number.
Yeah. You see, maybe you should have told me this stuff in advance so I could look up some history to better inform my opinion. My right off the bat, I wanted to say over. I just feel, I keep saying this, but like there are multiple ways for him to get there. You know what I mean? Like he had, last season he didn't hit for a ton of power. And yet he was still at 123.
This past year was, yeah, right, exactly, 123.
Because he's always going to walk a lot. He's not going to strike out a ton, so he's going to put the ball in play. And when he puts the ball in play a lot, now he's going to have more avenues to turn that into a base hit because of shift restrictions. So I'm going to say over. His career's 116, but he had 135 in 2019. I'd say over, but I do think you're right. That's a good number. I mean, early in his career, I think he was a different type of hitter too. Or maybe he was swinging for the fences more.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a weird career in how he's gotten to his numbers, which I think is a fascinating conversation. Let's say we can pick and choose how he gets there, because in 21 he finished with a 119 WRC plus. Again, that's 19% above the league average hitter, where 100 is league average, but he had 27 home runs. This past year in 2022 he had a 123, so slightly better in WRC plus, maybe similar production, but the league was a little bit worse. In any case, 23% above the league average, so similar sort of production compared to the league. Only 17 home runs. Would you prefer to have a season where he hits more home runs, but maybe overall is slightly worse? Or do you not care how he gets to his numbers and you only care about the run creation, period? Does it matter for this offense in particular? Yeah. If he's drawing a ton of walks and getting his value there, but maybe only hitting 17, 18, 19 home runs? Or would you like to see him bring more power, that thing that this team desperately needed? And maybe that leads to slightly less total value.
Ready for this answer?
Oh, God. If you even hit me with it, I'm just getting up and walking away.
Here's why it depends.
God, see ya. Have fun hosting the rest of the show. Bye.
I need to know two things, two people. What are Josh Naylor and Oscar Gonzalez doing?
Okay.
Because there's a lot of value in Bell being his typical self with a 360 on base percentage and maybe not having the power that he's shown he can hit for if Naylor's hitting 30 bombs and Gonzalez is improving upon what he did last season. If the league figures him out, if Naylor's still a platoon player, then I probably need Bell to hit 30 home runs and get to his WRC plus that way. So I think it depends. I think for this, Like, for this lineup to reach the peak of its powers, maybe you want Bell to just be a damn good hitter, whatever that means. Because then you can get, you need the production from the other quote-unquote power hitters.
Well,
I mean,
I guess
Zunino could hit 30. So, like, there are other
yeah.
avenues to getting power. You need them to work.
Well, I guess to your point, if he's surrounded by other people that are doing their job, if he's drawing tons of walks and creating value that way, who cares? Who cares?
Exactly.
Total value. But if nobody else is doing anything, but yet Josh Bell's getting on first base, in a vacuum, you'd say, fine. But for this offense, maybe you need him to create a few more runs himself by hitting it over the fence. Yeah, I guess I get it. But without being able to predict that, I think I'll just take the overall value as it is, no matter how he gets there.
Mm-hmm.
And just
Quan
hope
could
that,
hit 25.
Okay, show me that world. Show me that world. Is that the world where the fences don't exist? Is that the fun zaniness that we were dreaming up? Okay,
He just
next
turns
one.
on every 2-0 fastball.
Next one. Andres Jimenez. I think this is another good number. 16 home runs.
That's another
good.
guy.
I say good because not that the power was a fluke, but maybe he maximized it as much as he can, and he's always going to live somewhere around 16, 17. So I feel like that's a really good number.
So remember in 2021, he was actively trying to hit for power, and he hit 5 in half a season. Last year he hit 17. It depends what he wants to be. That's a really tough one. I don't want to take the over for every single player. I think I'll say under, but I don't really have a rhyme or a reason to it. I don't have a good feel for him. I have no idea what to make of him this season, because I feel like he so far surpassed expectations in every facet of his game that it's hard to comprehend how he can improve. And I guess one way he could improve is hitting for more power. And maybe that comes with having more patience. Because if pitchers feel like they have to throw it in the strike zone more, he can capitalize on that. But it's just so hard for me to visualize an even better Andres Jimenez. So I'll say under.
My brain is saying that's the smart play, but my heart, what I would love to, the season I would love to see him have is definitely an over. You know what? We'll go over. We'll go over. Good feelings, good vibes. I don't think I answered the Josh Bell one. I'm going to take the slight under on that one, the 122. So we'll differ on those two. This one's a fun one. Bo Naylor. This one's not exactly as scientific, although they have him at a 95 WRC+. That would be fantastic. That's not the over-under. The over-under is the number of games they have listed, 63. Over or under 63 for Bo Naylor.
So if you figure he starts the season in AAA, and let's say he spends 6 weeks there, and that takes us to maybe like mid-May, and there's 120 games left, is he going to catch more than half of those? I don't know. But doesn't it seem like a waste? If Bo Naylor, this prized prospect who was called up at the end of last season because he had accomplished so much at AA and AAA, and you wanted him to at least just get his feet wet, and then the next season he catches 45 games? Doesn't that seem like a waste?
Yeah,
and you're saying...
But hold on. What if the games that he catches are more valuable late in the season or toward the playoffs? Is it as much of a waste if he's catching valuable games in September and October?
Here's why I'm taking the over. This is just games played, right? Not games started. So it might be a part in a game where you need a hit, and Zunino is all or nothing. And there's a righty on the mound, and you got Will Brennan on the bench. You're turning into a pinch hitter. So maybe you got to get that runner home from third. It's not like last season where it seemed like you must pinch hit for Hedges and Maile every opportunity you can. And it didn't seem like they did enough. I think I would take the over. Because even if Naylor starts 45 games, 50 games for Cleveland, he's getting in another 15 to 20 as just late innings. Maybe a defensive replacement for a few innings to get Zunino off his feet in a blowout, stuff like that. So I'll take the over.
I like the reasoning. I'm going to go with the under. I think it's too tough to catch up once he finally arrives. And I'm not factoring in an injury or anything.
But that's the thing, too, is who's to say Zunino doesn't need to go on the shelf? I mean, catchers get beat up. Think about how many times Hedges got hit in the mask and had to miss a couple days, or there were thoughts he might go on the concussion injured list. I think he did at one point last season. That stuff happens. Like,
sure.
Zunino's not catching 140 games. I guess the question is, when does Naylor come up and start chipping away at that total?
Yeah, that's my thought. And along those lines, let's stick with Zunino. The projections at the bat have him at a 2.3 wins above replacement.
I'm going to say under.
Ooh.
I think...
Is it due to playing time, or is it due to just the way that he's playing?
Maybe a little of both. I mean, more so the playing time, but I will say, like, if you look at like his page on Fangraphs, he has provided ample defensive value every single year. So that works in his favor. I think I'm interested to see how catchers are evaluated with all the new rules. You know, it's going to be interesting to see just how prevalent the stolen base is and holding runners and all that stuff. And, you know, I'm talking about more than just his WAR total here, but like, this is a new pitching staff. He's got to get to know all of these people and learn their tendencies. And, you know, they've had pretty good continuity at catcher. It was, you know, you had Carlos Santana and Yan Gomes, and then Gomes took over, and Roberto Perez was his understudy, and then Roberto Perez took over, and Austin Hedges came over in that trade in 2020 and didn't catch much, but was on the Major League roster, and then Hedges took over, and now you're just starting from scratch. They haven't really done that in a long time. So that'll be interesting. I just think there's a lot for him. He's doing all this while also coming off of a really significant injury. So, what'd you say, 2.3?
Mm-hmm.
That seems a little high to me. He's only gone over that 3 times in 10 seasons. So I'm going to say under. He's only gone, he's gone over it once once in the last 5 years.
Another one that I would love to project the over. I think it's tough coming off the injury to think that he's going to get back to 21. See, that's some of the problems with the projections, that they're not going to factor in the type of injury they're coming off of, and for a guy that has their entire offensive value is created through their power, and then you have the thoracic outlet. Does that hurt power? I don't know. This is an injury typically related to pitchers. I don't know how it's going to impact a hitter. And also, maybe I'm overblowing it because it happened in the middle of last year, and he's had, how long? 9 months to get over this thing, and maybe he's worked up the strength. And if it had happened in October, then it might be a huge thing, but he's had time to rehab and get back, and he's going to be just fine strength-wise. I don't know until we actually see it play out. So I think the smart thing is to take the under. But man, if this guy is healthy, it could end up being a sleeper signing, one of the best sleeper signings in baseball. I just don't know. I'm not there letting this dude take the physical. So that's why it's difficult to project the over.
So you just told him, get over it. That's what I heard.
Yes. Okay, 2 more. Miles Straw, 88 WRC plus.
I'm going to say under. That's another one where I've got to see it before I can believe it. And I saw it a little bit in 2021.
You did! Right.
Yeah, and he was, I mean, limited sample size, but like 2019, he was better than league average at the plate. It's in there. It's just, it seemed like pitchers had executed this strategy last season where, okay, this guy's not going to hit the ball hard, and he's just going to pop it up to right field every time or hit a soft roller to shortstop. So we'll just pound the strike zone. And a guy who has really good plate discipline and really good contact ability, if he can't do anything with those pitches in the strike zone, then he's not exactly striking fear into pitchers. And they know that if they make a mistake, he's not hitting it out of the park either. So that just gives pitchers an inherent advantage. And I think, I don't know, he needs to be walking to be really effective. And while his walk rate was still solid last year, it was down. There was a part in the season where it just cratered. And I don't know, 88, like, cause I think you'd be fine. Like if he produces 80 to 85, I think you'd take that. So I'll say he's more in that range, and I'll take the under.
I'm going to take the slight over. Yeah. I wonder how much was pitcher execution and how much was his own game plan that got messed up. I'd even theorized that maybe he was focusing too much on contact because the strikeouts were down. The contact was absolutely terrible. And was he just focusing so much on maybe trying to hit the ball in specific areas and instead of just swinging and not, if you swing and miss some, okay. I can't tell you there's much difference between the weak pop out to the second baseman and the strikeout. Other than maybe, 1 out of 100 times if you're talking about a good fielding percentage. Hey, we mentioned fielding percentage on this show. That turns into a error.
Yeah, but I think also 1 out of 100 times the strikeout gets away from the catcher and he reaches first base.
That's true. So the ability to reset for whatever reason, when you can just flush a year like he just had, I think there's something to it. It doesn't completely give you everything you need. Like you got to make some adjustments, but there's more than what we saw this past year. There's no doubt because we've seen it previously in his career. I don't think when you watched 21, did you think the way that guy was hitting that this isn't totally sustainable, that he's doing something absolutely crazy? And that was when he was like a league average bat.
I always said you want him to be hitting ninth, not first.
Agreed.
I remember saying that at the time. But I mean, it reached a point last year where they were like, I don't know, just throw Will Benson out there for a few days and see if that helps. I mean, it got pretty ugly last year. So to just assume that's
still stuck with him.
The truth always lies somewhere in the middle. It's just, where is the middle? Because the last 2 years he was 97 and 64. The middle is below 88.
I know where the middle is. The middle would be what you would be determined as average. I've found it. Ahmed Rosario, 2.9 wins above replacement. Our final over-under here, courtesy of the BAT projection system. Another one I feel like, man, is that a good number. Right around 3 wins.
Well, you could poll 1,000 Guardians fans and 500 would say over, 500 would say under. But here's the thing.
Best 3 wins ever, worst 3 wins ever.
2.9, but the last 2 seasons he's gone 2.4, 2.4. So my question would be, where does he get better? that leads to that increase? And I don't know what the answer is. So I think I would take the under.
Well, keep in mind, we're also talking about Fangraphs WAR. He was significantly better in terms of Baseball Reference WAR.
Which are you using here?
I don't, their version of WAR, I don't know what you would compare it to. A meeting in the middle, which would be at about 3 wins.
Okay. I guess because it shows the bat on Fangraphs page, so I'm just looking at that and comparing. But I guess I would take the under. I don't know. I just assume he's going to put up the exact same numbers he seems to put up every 162 game season. He'll hit 280-ish with a 315 on base percentage and slugging percentage of 400 with 11 home runs, 20 stolen bases at a good clip, really low walk rate, reasonable strikeout rate. The end. And then it maybe his defense determines whether he meets your WAR qualifications or not. WRC plus will be 100. And half the fan base will want him signed to a 6-year, $190 million extension, and the other fan base wants him traded yesterday.
You know what I enjoy about the Ahmed Rosario wars? Is I've said, I think Ahmed Rosario is a good player, solid player. I don't think he should be signed to a 11-year extension, and I also don't think that he should be traded tomorrow for a bag of balls. I've always felt like he's solid. He's what you need right now. And when I enter an argument with anyone that wants to talk about Ahmed Rosario, they always get confused because it's either coming from it. I guess people are just used to arguing with someone that it takes the other side of this. You want him signed to an extent? No, I don't. You want him traded? No, I don't. I'm just perfectly happy with where he's at right now. I think this is fine. And then people
that makes
get all
for
confused.
terrible radio.
I don't. You can't attack. I'm not the guy you made up in your head that you're fighting in this argument with. That's not me. I think he's a good player, not a great player that occupies a needed spot right now. And that's it. That's it. That's the end. I think I'll take the slight under. But again, that feels like a real safe. Okay, so let me ask you this. He comes off a season where he gets to essentially 3 wins above replacement. Qualifying offer?
Yeah. But
Does he take it? Does he take it?
It depends.
Oh, God. All right, well, we're out of time. But before we end the show.
No, my answer is yes, because if he produces 3 WAR, then you probably didn't get a good look at Arias or Freeman. There was no need for Rocchio. So, yeah, you offer it to him. He's not going to accept it. He's going to be the star free agent. But for some reason, if he accepts it, like if he loves Cleveland so much, maybe he just fell in love with Winking Lizard's wing sauces and says, I can't get this anywhere else. I got to stay here for 1 more year. And he accepts the qualifying offer. You're fine because you didn't learn about your young guys anyway because he had a good season.
We found the flaw in the please stay LeBron logic. I never saw in that video once them mention Winking Lizard sauces. So we've found the reason why he took off for Miami at the time. Forgot to remind him about Winking Lizard. We've spent the last 25, 30 minutes talking about a computer projection system. No doubt you have seen a number of people putting things into OpenAI and the ChatGPT tool. Have you had a chance to go utilize the prompt yet? Have you plugged anything in there?
No.
So this would be your first experience with the ChatGPT. Recently, for fun, what other reason would there be? Before the computers take over, I figured I would ask them, what makes the Godcast, the Selby's Godcast, the best podcast? And it gave me a 5-paragraph answer. Would you like to know what it said?
I'm scared.
Keep in mind, this is all written by AI. All I did was provide the prompt. This
Allen
took it
Iverson.
from there. Once upon a time, there was a podcast called The Selby is Godcast, named after the unlikely hero, Bill Selby. It was a podcast about baseball, but it was so much more than just a sports show. The hosts, Tyler and Nick, were passionate about the game and brought a unique perspective to every episode. They broke down the latest news and trends in sports, but they also brought humor and heart to their discussions. What set the Selby is Godcast apart was their love for the game and the way they connected with their listeners. They shared stories from their own experiences and invited fans to share their thoughts and opinions. They also brought in special guests from all corners of the baseball world, from former players to writers and analysts. Okay. The show quickly gained a dedicated following, with fans tuning in every week to hear Tyler and Nick's latest insights and opinions. They loved the way the hosts approached the sport and the way they brought their own personalities to the show. What made the Selby is Godcast truly special was its ability to bring people together. Fans from all over the world would tune in, and they formed a tight-knit community that connected over their shared love of baseball. They would discuss the latest episodes on social media and even organize meetups to watch games together. Are you taking notes? From Tyler and Nick, the Selby is Godcast. Which one are you? Are you Tyler or Nick?
I'm Nick.
The Selby is Godcast was more than just a podcast. It was a platform to share their passion for the game and to bring people together. And that is why it was the best podcast in the world. Because it brought people together, created a community, and allowed fans to connect with their shared love of baseball. Years have passed since the first episode of the Selby is Godcast was released, but the legacy of the show lives on. Fans still listen to old episodes, and new listeners discover the magic of the show every day. For Tyler, Nick, and the fans of the Selby is Godcast, it will always be the best podcast in the world.
In other words, it's not about the podcast itself. It's about the friends Tyler and Nick made along the way.
Oh my goodness. So much felt so very spot on. And yet, Nick, that just really tugged on the heartstrings. I don't have anything else to add.
No, there's still a little ways for the robots to go before they can fully take over.
Actually, this show has been all AI. For Nick and Tyler, we're not real. This is all part of your imagination.